Recording in progress.
All right. Item 3 on our agenda is a presentation. Very excited about it. It's the Delaware Aqueduct Repair Shutdown Impacts by Jeff Skelding. Jeff is, of course, the Executive Director of Friends of the Upper Delaware. He's been a good friend and ally of our group, and we appreciate hearing from Jeff to bring us up to date on what's going on.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everybody. So I know we always have limited time here. I'll try to race through this. We have a few slides to show. We also have some special guests tonight. Jennifer Grigliano is here from New York City DEP. She is the epicenter of this whole thing. So we're happy to have her here. Maybe Jen can, in short, help us understand stuff that we are going to talk about tonight. Garth Pettinger's on the Zoom call. He's from Trout Unlimited. I think he's there. I thought I saw him.
Yes, he's there.
He is. And both Jennifer and Garth made presentations at the Delaware River Basin Commission meeting last week, the Regulated Flow Advisory Committee. And I see Amy Shawcross from Delaware River Basin Commission as well. So we got a lot of experts here, so that's going to help me. I'm not the expert here to try to generally frame out what is happening here with this and some of our thoughts about this, particularly as it impacts the upper river below the New York City dams at Capacton, Cannonsville, and Neversink. So what's happening here on October 1st, we're going to have a shutdown. And I'm sorry, Diane Tharp, how can I not, is with me from Nordell Conservancy. She's been working on these issues for a long time. From a flooding perspective, concerns about flooding below the reservoirs. And Diane will also chime in and add, right, I'm sure, to what I can say tonight. So on October 1st, we're the Delaware Aqueduct, the tunnel receives all the water from the three the New York City Delaware reservoirs, is going to be shut down for repairs. There's leaks in, I hate to say the name of that town, Worsing, is that right? Worsing, and that's been going on for a while. This planning for this project, as we go on, the city has been planning for years to get this in order. We're happy it's happening. We're going to conserve water. We're going to protect communities. We're going to protect people. It's a good thing. So next, Carrie, next slide. Okay, Diane, you might look here and just point while I talk. So there's a picture that we stole from Jennifer's website. I hope you don't mind, Jennifer.
And I just wanted all to say that we certainly appreciate that preparing for this aqueduct shutdown by the city has to be a nightmare, because all of a sudden on October 1st, they're going to lose half the water that usually supplies the city. So we certainly appreciate all of that. And what's going to be happening is, in order to prepare the Delaware Aqueduct, there'll be a 2.5 mile bypass tunnel that will be built to repair with the part that's leaking. And then as it's dewatered, the rest of the aqueduct will be looked at to repair the leakage that's going on in the Worsing. And in the meantime, what that means is the water that comes through from Cannonsville, Capacton, and Neversink to the Rondout will cease to happen. That will no longer be diverted, and then nothing will come through the Delaware Aqueduct from Rondout, starting on approximately on October 1st. And so that's what all this is going to mean for us. So the next slide. Yeah.
On the map, where is the roundabout?
Right here. Oh, you got the thing, great.
Right, I think the repair stuff is down around this area here.
Right.
So they need
But the worst thing's actually up.
we need a dry time to get in there and work for dry conditions, and so we're shutting off these diversions from the three Delaware watersheds and the reservoirs in the next slide. So we typically have a 500 to 600 million gallon per day, roughly, right, Jennifer, diversion from the Delaware reservoirs. That's going to be reduced to zero. So the water, you know, there's a concern that there's going to be water build up in the reservoirs. All of this is dependent on whether anybody you talk to about this, Jennifer from New York City, DRBC folks, all of us everything's dependent on, rain or dry or somewhere in the middle. Very hard to predict, although the city does some pretty sophisticated forecasting and modeling. You can take a good shot at what's going to happen in the future. It's not possible to do it 100%. So that's a big wild card here. But by shutting off that 500, diversion, let's get our terminology right. Diversion means the water that goes to the city of New York for water supply. And releases of the water is the water that comes from the bottom of the dams down the river, down here in the area of interest that you are all involved.
On point number 2, where it says water buildup, why is it building up? I'm missing something.
Well, it's a concern. So if there are 4 ways that water gets out of the reservoirs: diversions, releases, spillage over the dam, and evapotranspiration. So if we eliminate one of those ways, which is diversions, which are going to 0, right? There's going to, now that we've lost one way to get the water out of the reservoir. So if it's, especially if it's wet, we might see a more rapid buildup in the reservoir.
So New York City has said that prior to this, they will draw down the reservoirs. And I know on the fact sheet, I think you actually have that. I think that was distributed. They're going to try to do draw them down by 30% if possible. And I know in Jennifer's presentation, she had given, there was a normal period, a wet period, and a dry period, and that will probably be based on exactly how much they'll be able to draw them down.
So this will likely lead to, we were talking earlier before the meeting, I think Al, you and I were talking about the possibility of larger downriver releases, especially well, with the drawdown before the project starts, before they draw down the reservoirs on October 1st. And then certainly if it's a wet season, we're likely to see higher levels of releases from the reservoirs. And that's where we start to get into this area of concern about flooding. And flooding is anybody's definition, but there has been flooding even when the diversions are active. So it's something we're paying attention to here. And then once, Jennifer, I hope I got this right. Once you get going here, it sounds like the only factor that might cause you to alter or modify or cease is a drought condition.
There are several.
There's
a whole bailout plan. There's a whole no-go decision matrix that our commissioner is looking at weekly at this point to see if we go into the shutdown in October.
Okay.
Is it all based on wet hydrologic conditions, or is it just based on drought?
It's based on drought, the way that you're asking the question. There are several other factors that are taken into consideration. We are looking at wet conditions as part of this based on all the concerns that we have heard. So that is being considered. So it's not except under drought conditions, but in the matrix we have added the wet conditions because of all the concerns.
Great, thank you so much for considering that now.
Okay, so this is, thanks. I'm glad Jennifer's here. This is
Yes.
not correct. Well, our concern was once you get going, we have a super wet season. That's just going to add to the flood threat. And is the city saying, hey, wait a minute, at some point, maybe we have to do something different because of the wetter conditions. Jennifer just confirmed that they're thinking about that. So, Carrie, you want to go next? Why are we concerned? We've sort of been talking around this in the last few minutes. Reservoir review inflows could be higher than their ability to handle. We don't have all the resources that the city of New York has, and we understand that and respect that they do. And know that they have tremendous more engineering capacity and science capacity and data. But we have had the ability to take a look at the last 10 years. President Pettinger is on the line here, made a presentation at the RFAC meeting. And what we think we're seeing is that on average, the inflows into the reservoirs can exceed the capacity or the ability of the reservoir to discharge, the mechanical ability which would result
Even at maximum releases.
Even at maximum releases. So this has sort of been a point where we're rolling around with it, and we've talked to the city about it. We've talked to some other of the decree parties about it. And it's for us, it's sort of right now, it's just a little bit of a fuzzy area You know, maybe Jennifer, you want to comment on that? When we feel like we're looking at something and we think it has some validity, but we're just not sure if the parties have seen it or have an opinion on it, or
The decree parties have been briefed on this shutdown. I have updated the modeling, I've been briefing, the decree party work group, I briefed the decree party principals, they saw the same slides that were presented at RFAC. Actually, the way that I presented it at RFAC was in direct response to New Jersey's request to see the different percentiles for a dry, average, or a wet year. So that was, in a direct response to one of the decree parties. We're talking about it regularly. New York City is committed to go back to them and brief them, regularly and in increasing frequency as we get closer to the shutdown. And as we get closer to the shutdown, I'm agreed to give another presentation at RFAC, another public presentation in that arena for the decree parties, to put out some more information.
Okay, and then in the FEIS, the New York City EPA determined that stipends would not be needed except at Rondout. And I know that was one of the questions I had asked Jennifer before about what inflow and outflow data was used. And I think for the FEIS, the determination was a period of record up to 2012. I don't know if there's been any modeling since then about the use of stipends or not. This is just something that I wanted to say. Had it been determined that we did need stipends that never sink and impact, and also it would have provided a contingency plan for a backup release system should we have a very wet year. And at this point, I don't believe, we've taken the average over 10 years, but we really haven't modeled just what would all these inflows and outflows look like during a wet year. And so that's one of our main concerns, that we're not sure we have a contingency plan if we should have a very wet year after the aqueduct is closed. So reservoirs will only be able to be lowered by release valves or spilling once we shut down that aqueduct. So those would be the only two things. And we all in this room know that once the reservoirs are spilling like they are right now, even with maximum releases, it takes quite a while to get them down where they stop spilling again. So that's the only two ways we'll be able to have to get the water out. So there is a possibility of sustained spillage of the dam, even with maximum releases during the shutdown. That's what's happening actually right now. We have spilling reservoirs and we have maximum releases right now. So there is a greater potential for flooding, especially in a wet year, since the major flooding has occurred. We all remember 2005 and 6, and I think 2011 was also one for all of you up here. By the way, I live on Cheyenne, Delaware, which is my gauge is the Tox Island gauge, which is about to go up to 15 feet tomorrow morning. So there is a greater potential for flooding during the shutdown, since we have had major flooding previously, even with diversions. So that's why we're kind of looking at all of these concerns. Did you want to add anything to that? Is that Jennifer?
No, like Jeff said, we do have state-of-the-art tools. I can't fully predict what's going to happen. It's a forecast, and we are going to do everything in our power. We're going to watch it very closely. We have a very large team. We have a lot of different expertise on our team who's going to be watching, leading into the shutdown, during the shutdown, and even after the shutdown. It's a bit of a balancing act for us. So ahead of the shutdown, we're going to be hitting the Delaware system hard, for us, and drawing as much water out of there. The diversions are going to be as high as we can get them, while keeping the Catskill and the Croton systems as high as we can. Because once we shut down the Delaware system, all we have left are the Catskill and the Croton systems.
Right.
So those two systems are gonna be drawn down. So while we're drawing those two systems down, yes, we anticipate the Delaware reservoirs to fill back up. But this is also during the October to March period, when we would be expecting the reservoirs to start to do that spring refill anyway. And then once the shutdown is done, we need to hit the Delaware system again very hard, and the diversions coming out of the Delaware are gonna be big, so that we bring the system back into balance. Because normally the way we operate the system is that we draw down the three systems in tandem, trying not to get one, less empty than the other, so that we're not fully favored. And that's typically how we operate. So this will be a little bit different for us, the way that we operate. We're gonna use a lot of Delaware, then we're gonna use no Delaware, and then we're gonna use a lot of Delaware again.
I know when Garth had done his modeling, he had said that from day one of the shutdown, we need to do maximum releases from compactant and never sink for all, for most of the shutdown, in order to compensate for the water that's not being diverted, and also for the inflows and the out, that normally overcome the outflows. So is that something that the city has in mind, to start the maximum releases as soon as you shut down the aqueduct?
The maximum releases will be well before we shut down.
And then after?
In order to draw them down. And then while we're shut down, depending on what the hydrologic conditions are, that will determine whether we're at maximum sustainable releases, or it's a little bit less than that. It will be based on whatever the conditions are at the time. If it's dry,
Right.
we won't be at maximum
Right.
sustainable.
I understand that.
If it's wet, we will be at maximum sustainable releases.
I'm glad you're here tonight.
And just to, Jennifer, when you say max, so I think I heard you say we're gonna have maximum releases during the drawdown.
Yes.
And just so folks know, maximum releases, those are the fully maximum mechanical, the top end of the mechanical ability of the reservoir.
Right,
for each
so-
reservoir.
Right, so at a Cannonsville, that's 1,500 CFS, at a Compacted, that's 700 CFS, and at a Neversink, that's 190.
That's to get to the drawdown target
Yes.
for October 1st.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Karen, you want to put this in? So that gets to what do we want from New York City DEP? We're talking about this issue of flooding. That's the topic of conversation tonight. We're worried that below the dams, we might see depending on the weather, that we might see conditions that are going to be to make folks nervous in these communities that all you represent below the dams, and that's what we're talking about tonight. We're glad Jennifer is here. I think she's understanding and has heard this before. We're really want to feel as comfortable as we can that the city of New York is looking at this,
Right.
and is on top of it. It sounds like they are. The information on the initial drawdown target, that sounds like a range to me for each reservoir. You're in a range. That's all 74% of Compacted. That's all 60% Cannonsville. I've seen some different numbers. So
Yes, and we continue to model those based on, the closer we are to it, the better information we have about hydrologic conditions, and the long-term forecasts, they don't have the greatest skill. So, going into it, the closer we get, the better predictability we have, and the better the forecasts are.
we talked about, is there a need for, given all these variables and everything that's happening here, our understanding is that the flexible flow management program, which is the plan that governs the reservoir management since 2007, will continue to be the governing protocol here all the way through this process, and which includes things like 15% voids after the October 1st drawdown, and then the regular release tables. And we're concerned, especially under extremely wet conditions, to be the governing sort of protocol, or do we need some sort of special shutdown plan? So I think, Jennifer, you sort of we're sort of talking about what this might look
Yeah,
like already.
because you've already said about maximum releases, which would not be in those tables at the FFMP.
Right, and that special shutdown plan is in the FEIS.
Okay, all right, so it was greater releases.
And then what about this one? This was,
She
we were
kind
going
of,
to ask this council to ask New York City this question, but we have New York City right here tonight.
yeah, and she kind of touched on that, but what we're asking the New York City DP to do is to do everything possible to minimize the flooding risk prior to the closure, and then to provide that plan that's going to keep the voids in the reservoirs until the time when they need to have it built back up in the spring. So in our experience, and it's kind of like a whole different way for the city to look at our reservoirs right now, because they're not going to be using any of the water for 5 to 8 months. So normally the city, when they're looking at doing maximum releases, they are looking to see if the storm is actually going to arrive, and should they depend on that because they need to keep as much water in the city as possible. But so they're most of the time, a lot of times, reactive rather than being proactive. But now with the aqueduct shutdown, they need to be proactive with those releases based on the fact that the inflows over a 10-year period have been greater than the outflows of maximum releases. So they need to maybe not base it just entirely on the weather forecast, but knowing or base it on the average inflows for perhaps the last 10 years, or even during a wet year, if it turns out to be a wet year, that you would have to continue those maximum releases in order to keep a void in the reservoir up to the point we're going to use it.
That's why we look at the different percentages. We look at the 10th percentile, the 50th percentile, and the 90th percentile. So the 10th is dry, 50th is average, and the 90th is wet. So what we do internally when we're looking at this is we run those different percentiles. We also run some statistics to see where the forecast is actually hitting. Is the forecast telling us that it's going to be wet? Is it actually hitting there? Or is it telling us that it's going to be dry, but it's not actually hitting there, it's running more average? So we should pay more attention to that 50% line and not listen to necessarily that 10% line. So, I mean, we have skilled meteorologists on staff, we have skilled modeling teams on staff. I mean, that's what they're doing when you're taking a look at it. They're looking at it from multiple angles and not just one.
Because right now, I mean, we do have spilling reservoirs, and we are supposed to be like at the 100% level, but we're above that at all the reservoirs. Because perhaps maximum releases weren't being made prior to the snow melt or whatever. Because again, like I said, a lot of times you have to be, you know, reactive rather than proactive because you're trying to keep as much water as you can from the city. But this will be a different case scenario during this shutdown. Okay, and
So the last, well, we're doing this right now. And thank again, you know, your agenda said I was supposed to be making a presentation, but Jennifer's here and Diane's here. They took the weight off of me, but so Jennifer has said a number of times there was extensive evaluation of this project. It's been going on for a long time, and a lot of it happened some years ago. And our concern, you've heard this from me before, and so that's a distant memory for a lot of people. We're up here where it matters most, in our opinion. This is, and I feel like this is news to this group, sort of. I know there's been some information shared with this group, but we're hopeful that the city is willing to come out here more and talk to us. And you mentioned in artifact the communication plan is hovering around some other.
It's in the works. It's with the deputy commissioner and the commissioner.
Right, because you know, up and above the jurisdiction of this council in, let's say, in Colchester and in Composite, New York, right below the dams, you know, that's where I live, and I can tell you every day, like, we're looking at this, and despite all the efforts that have gone on, which we recognize, there is, you know, people just don't know about this.
Right.
And that's half the battle, I think, if we can get people to know what's coming here and then understand all the variables, that would be much appreciated. The city can put some energy into. Al, you got a question?
What's the CFS release on Cannonsville and Pacton through the diversion tunnels?
Like what we can see.
When they're wide open, we know what the CFS is on releases.
Oh, I don't have those numbers with me. I don't
800.
want to tell you the wrong numbers.
800. I just calculated it. If you have a drawdown through the aqueducts of 5 to 6 million gallons, 500 to 600 million gallons a day, it converts to roughly 800 cubic feet per second of flow. And that's what I was looking at. I was trying to keep it relative to the units of measurement we use here as far as baseline flow.
Right,
And-
but each reservoir has its own type and they're different sizes.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you how it's divided, yeah.
We can get you
Yeah,
that
you can find out.
information. I don't want to tell you the wrong numbers.
The other question, just real quick, and the same thing is, what's the average when it's coming over the spillway on both of the reservoirs? You don't have to answer that. It's CFS.
It depends on, it depends.
1 inch or 1 foot.
Yeah, it could be an inch coming over, it could be a foot coming over. Those are-
Somebody's got to have the average figure someplace. I was just curious.
We can get that for you.
At flood stage in Barryville, you could have 30,000 cubic feet per second at the bridge. So, I'm looking at it relative. It's more critical upstream than I think on the main part of the Delaware, because even if it's being outletted at different points, it all ends up on the Delaware, either through the Neversink or through the the east and west branch. So it's really a headwater type issue than a lower Delaware, because adding 500 or 600 cubic feet per second of volume isn't that significant, say in Barryville. I'm familiar with that point.
Well, I think there's been a long-standing debate about how far down does it matter? And where I live in Hancock, I don't have to really live with that because we're essentially the shadows of the dam. We feel like we're at ground zero. I will say, Diane and Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, that as we've taken a look at this, I think our assessment is we're not that concerned about problems at Cannonsville.
Right,
We started to get
that
concerned at the Pacton, but really it is the Neversink we feel like is holds the most potential here for flooding concern. Just depending on the weather. So,
And the Neversink actually is probably the most preferential stream because there's not a lot of development along it. Correct. It's
so Aaron, so you get down to then you're starting to get a lot there.
yeah, but at that point, it's pretty
Yeah,
pretty
that's
basic.
where our flooding.
where you south of Boston. Yes, it's south. Yeah. And I'm just trying to keep the numbers relative to the normal range of stream flow in these rivers.
So our main goal tonight was to just inform all of you of what is going on, what's about to happen, and so you can spread the news to everyone in your towns, because it's important that everyone realizes. And I think we have some legitimate concerns here, because we need to know when that aqueduct is closed, what are those drawdowns? How far are they going to be able to draw them down? And will that be able to maintain a void in reservoirs during that shutdown? And it's 5 to 8 months, which puts us into the 8 months, which is in May, which is after the snow melt and the spring rains, etc. So if the reservoirs have been full and spilling for 2 or 3 months, and then we have that going on top of it, we could really get in trouble.
October 2022 till when?
So possibly May is the 5 to 8 months. So let's hope for the 5. I'm sure the city is hoping, but
Everybody is hoping.
yeah.
Yeah, it says here in the second page, 3 Delaware Basin reservoirs, Neversink, Pacton, and Cannonsville will not convey water to Roundout reservoirs during the during the shutdown.
Correct.
Now, can a roundabout satisfy the demands for the New York City water?
They got other water.
Pardon?
They got other water. to rely on.
It's all coming
So
from
dams.
their Croton and their Catskill side.
Yeah.
They have.
I see.
If you go back to the map, Carrie, it's the second
Yeah,
section.
the
I think that's
roundout
something
is the start of the Delaware Aqueduct, so it gets shut down
blowing
at
up, then.
Roundout. That's where it gets shut down.
Yeah, this is, so from this line over is the Delaware system, that's all we're talking about.
Yeah,
We also have the Catskill system, and down here we have the Croton system. We've got others.
Yeah. I,
Yeah, I'm overwhelmed by some of this stuff. And it certainly is unsettling. And we see these extreme weather patterns coming across the country pretty frequently now, with heavy rainfalls. And I'm wondering, do we know, say on an average season, what 2 inches or 4 inches, 6 inches of rainfall in a watershed means in terms of how many gallons we have to either we're going to accumulate or we're going to get rid of?
That is something I can do for you. I mean, I wasn't asked to come here tonight to speak. We saw that this was happening, so I did not prepare anything. But if you'd like something specific, I'd be more than happy to come back and
Well,
give that.
if somebody would, I mean, I would call myself a layman or something in this process, I don't know. But I do watch the weather quite a lot. And, you know, if you see this huge storm that's in 3 days is going to move through the Northeast and expect 6 to 8 inches of rain, should we pull the boats out then? Or put the boats in or whatever the term would be to save yourself?
The USGS has these stations, that predictive stations, so that they will predict the water flow of the Delaware, all the sections, before the storm hits. And that's very, helpful, make your decisions fairly accurate.
I'm sure we're all looking at the gauge right now, or reservoirs going still.
I have a question. In a drought situation, does the city have the ability to take water out of the Hudson?
So we do have a pumping station in Shelton. That hasn't been used in many, many years. Probably, I think, before I was born, the last time it was used. And
So that doesn't work.
it works, we tested, but it would require, I mean, the mother of all droughts for us to be able to operate that thing again. I mean, we are not anticipating ever having to pull water out of the Hudson.
In the 60s, they did. I remember, a young kid that was there. When the Delaware went dry, they pumped water.
But Aaron's
I-
much older than you are.
And you're
You're
probably more
older
than
than you are.
me.
And she's older than all of us.
But it is a backup. I would assume
It-
It's part of the
it is,
backup
but
plan.
it's not something that we would, I mean, it would have to be really dire situation for New York City to turn to that, but
Jennifer,
it does.
Okay.
what provisions as far as public outreach, when this thing moves off the anticipated lines of what the flows in, out, when it gets out of balance, what provisions does the city have to inform groups like this and others, the public in general, that we're straying, either high or low?
So, I mean, we are building that communications plan, which I don't have the specifics of, and it's not approved yet. But as far as avenues of communication to get the word out, I mean, we've been going around to different conferences. Jeff has invited us to come and speak there, so we've gotten the word out that way. We do have a mailer list, like an email list, where we can do like a blast information. We have, it's called Everbridge. It's like a phone technology where like I could get on and record a phone message and just hit send, and it will go out to certain areas. You'll get like a robo call to your house, so to speak, and it will say, this is, the New York City Environmental Protection, this is your message. We have that capability. We have social media capability that we use. And in the event of like a really bad like flood situation or an emergency, we have the ability to work with the National Weather Service. And the National Weather Service can put out those like beeping alarms like you see on the TV and stuff that come out. So there are many avenues in the event that something goes wrong for us to get a message out, or if we're starting to see something, different avenues to get messages out. We're also very in tune with all the different emergency management offices. We hold meetings with them, so they're all in tune to this happening as well. So you can always contact them and
Thank you.
Our experience with that has been, Jennifer, if you remember back, we had the problem at the Kansas Dam. You guys, Paul and you and everybody else came up here and had very well thought out presentations that explained the whole situation. And really did, I think, really had a good effect on the community. I don't think there's any substitute for that. I don't, you know, I hate to put demands on you because I know you're busy, but that's what I envision when I think about, can we get, if we have a council, like this council only goes to Hancock, right? I have a coalition above Hancock up to the dams on the east branch and the west branch, called the Tailwaters Coalition. It's informal, but it's a group like this. It's the town supervisors and the mayors, and they would really benefit, I think, from, it's kind of hard to, you know, get them to come to you, if you can come to us in some way.
yeah, and I have heard that comment and I have taken that comment back, and it is with the deputy commissioner.
Great, thank you.
I think Kristen Barron, did you have a question, Kristen?
No, not now. Thank you. I just trying to figure out who's talking at different times, the names. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, in the scenario where you would activate that Chelsea pump station to bring water from the Hudson, how extensively would you have to treat that water during your drinking water standards?
I mean, that's why I'm saying it would be the mother of all droughts. Before we would operate that thing, I mean, it would have to be like a dire situation for the state, because the state would have to give us permission to operate that. So we can't just turn it on.
And with the Croton system now, they do have a filtration plant, Croton system, and that will supply 30% of the water to New York City. So that is a blessing now that the Aqueduct is proposing. That would certainly help.
Okay, we're gonna kind of run over our allotted time. So,
Andy, can I just say, we were very fortunate to have Jennifer here tonight.
Yes.
Yeah.
We didn't ask her to come.